Hello, everyone, and welcome to Security in the 21st Century. I'll be your host, Dr. Suzanne Loftus. This video podcast series aims to look at the most pressing security related challenges in the realm of international relations. It will feature interviews with professionals from academia, international organizations, the private sector, and government. The aim is to try to tie these sectors together into answering questions related to themes such as great power competition, disinformation campaigns, and transatlantic security. So stay tuned. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Security in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Dr. Suzanne Loftus. Thanks for tuning in again. Today, I'm pleased to have with us on the show Ms. Christina Orisich, the Deputy Director of the Geneva Centre for Security Policy. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Christina.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
I wanted to talk to Christina for various reasons. First of all, the Geneva Centre for Security Policy is quite similar to our own, the George C. Marshall European Centre for Security Studies. Both institutions focus on education in the security sector. So not only would it be interesting to engage in a dialogue with someone who works in a similar institution and talk about important security-related matters such as great power competition, transatlantic security, and disinformation campaigns, but also it would be interesting to address the topic of education itself and how education might change in the future, especially after this coronavirus pandemic that we're all facing today. In addition, Christina has extensive experience in the private sector, and the aim of this podcast is to tie in various sectors of society to have a more comprehensive and global approach to security-related challenges. So I thought Christina could bring in a wider perspective. And last but not least, Christina is a woman in the security sector, very much like myself, and has focused on the WPS agenda, Women, Peace, and Security, and quite a few projects in that domain, which I also wanted to ask her about. So I look very much forward to this conversation. Perhaps, Christina, you could tell us a little bit about the GCSP and your role in the organization.
With pleasure. So the GCSP, the Geneva Centre for Security Policy, is celebrating this year the 25th anniversary. It's an international foundation financed by the Swiss Confederation. But actually, if we are really looking at it in detail, it actually already exists much longer. Because what was an important event that led to the creation of the Geneva Centre for Security Policy was the famous meeting in Geneva in 1985 between President Reagan and Secretary Gorbachev, when they decided on the talks around disarmament. And what Switzerland realized at that time was that they didn't have enough experts on these key topics, both in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Defense. So the idea then was created to organize in Geneva a very specialized course that would bring about in 8 months over 140 experts from all over the world to help develop these key skills. And although the topics were mainly targeted at the beginning around disarmament related hardcore security topics, it has really evolved over time. And as you will have seen from the development of the last few decades, we have now become an organization that is focusing much broader on the security topic. So our mission is still the same. We are, here to promote international collaboration, security, and peace. What has changed or evolved over the years is that we have seen that security is not just about hardcore security topics, but has a much broader range of topics that need to be addressed if you want to really be serious and effective about those. And so over the years, still being very clear about our three core principles, which are Swiss principles of independence, impartiality, and inclusivity. We have developed the center to include all the different elements that are important from the topic perspective. So we now cover around between 19 different cluster areas, which all look at different areas of security, so be it human security, security and law, crisis leadership. Leadership as a whole is a very important topic that, as we've seen again now with the COVID crisis, and we have all the classical as well topics. Now, what we've also done is expanded the focus of the key stakeholders that we want to include. So originally, as I mentioned, it was mainly focused on people from Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Defense, but we have seen that it would be important to include all the other key stakeholders. And therefore, we're now working together with the international organizations, with NGOs, civil society, media more and more, and in recent years, also the private sector. And with our three principles of inclusivity and independence, impartiality, it's really important to understand that the GCSP is almost uniquely placed to actually bring all these key players together to discuss the different topics. Also with the inclusivity, we actually work with all the countries in the world. We currently actively have participants from 167 countries. So this is really, I think, something that is quite unique to have all these different nationalities in the room discussing the whole area of topics in security and peace and looking at it from all the different angles. Because what we've seen, that's just like with all the key challenges that we're currently facing, no one sector, no one person can solve these challenges by itself. And security and peace is something that is very complex, and all the actors need to come together. Probably won't agree all the time on the same topics, but it's important to understand where other people are coming from, and for each one of the stakeholders to actually have this overall perspective on the topic. And although at the beginning we mainly looked at executive education and did courses, which is still our main activity, we also have developed over the years different other activities. So for example, we also have diplomatic dialogue activities, bringing together players, the US, Russian on certain topics. We have topics also around North Korea, in the latest years also around Syria. We're doing mainly track 2, but there are the odd track 1.5 activities. And here again, being this neutral place in Switzerland allows for a platform that is safe for the different stakeholders from different countries to discuss openly and have that dialogue that sometimes is not possible at a political. We've also seen that we wanted to not just give the opportunity to the few that come here every year to Geneva in terms of having access to our speakers and experts across the world. So we have invested in the last 18 months into our digital amplification hub, which just as probably what you are also doing, we are having interviews, podcasts, all kinds of discussion that we are recording and sending across either on social media or to our alumni and bigger communities that we have. So we want to make sure that we disseminate the knowledge that is really quite key and unique that we can bring together here in the center, not just for the participants of our courses who can come here, but really share that and be part of that conversation across the globe. And what we have found also is that we have all these experts, we have diplomats who are here and who are in transition, we have others who are in career transitions. So we have developed also the Global Fellowship Initiative, which is an initiative that allows fellows to come here for a specific period of time and to actually customize how they would like to have the fellowship.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that comprehensive introduction and background to GCSP. It's true, as you said, Switzerland is very uniquely placed, being a neutral country, to have and welcome many different participants from all over the world to come in and share their ideas and different perspectives on security-related topics. Your background is very varied and interesting, and you have quite a bit of private sector experience, as I mentioned. How does that experience, would you say, reinforce or strengthen or contribute to the work that you do at GCSP?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so that's true. I think in terms of my background, I have a lot of private sector experience and also public sector experience on an international level. I've spent also some time in the European Commission, and a big part of my time at PwC, I've actually worked on EU-funded projects, TASIS, rebuilding, some of the elements in Eastern Europe. So there it was a lot of the public entities. So I think I bring a combination of both. And I think that another important element was the fact that before joining GCSP, I spent 12 years in executive education at the Center for Creative Leadership, which, truly is, a highly recognized leader in the field, especially in the area of leadership. And I think that it's the combination of all of this that has made it attractive for GCSP to get me on board, not just as deputy director of the center, but also as head of executive education. I think if you have followed the GCSP in recent years, you will have seen that with the arrival of the new director, Ambassador Ducé, around 2014, when the GCSP also moved to the Maison de la Paix, the House of Peace, where we are located today, a really enormous transformation has taken place. For much more focused also on executive education, the different areas of responsibilities that I've mentioned, the topic responsibility, have been set up as like little entrepreneurs. So this has been a really major shift. And although all the other activities have flourished, like I've mentioned before, the executive education is the one that was seen the most potential. And it was important to build on all the work that had been done since 2014 to take it to the next level. And this was one of the main drivers for bringing somebody in to the GCSP in this role that has a profile that is very different from any of my predecessors. I think that the other important element is, as you said, the private sector experience, because the GCSP, the last few years, really want to include more the private sectors, our stakeholders in all our different activities. And it was important to have somebody who also understood the needs and the ways of operation of the private sector. So since I came here, I've really tried to build on everything that was done, but really make sure that we are state of the art, that we continue with the executive education, not just from the content piece, but also in the way of how we deliver it. So we had set up a strategy until 2023 to be fully blended. And here the COVID actually has given us the opportunity actually to very quickly upskill and change our mode of delivery much quicker than 2023. So we've now almost in a few months reached where we wanted to be in 2023. So now we have the challenge of going beyond. And this is really important to understand because I was mentioning the different clusters that are like little entrepreneurs, but it's also important to really think ahead and be ahead of the curve, understand what are some of the needs, the challenges that we will face in the future that maybe people do not realize now, and how can we prepare leaders so that they're ready when these challenges arrive. And so we are more and more also looking at, what are the interconnections between the different topics? What does it mean? And really get this thinking out also in the decisions of which courses do we need to put forward? How do we create them? And I think COVID has shown to us a few things. Is first of all, we've really managed in 24 hours to move our existing courses into virtual delivery, and have since really upskilled our staff, developed more modalities, changed the design of the courses. And what we have found is twofold, is that first of all, if you really do that professionally and invest in instructional design and the experience of the participants in those virtual sessions, because you need to do them differently than the face-to-face, we actually can reach quite a high level of interactivity, of even cohesion of the group. We've had participants say that for certain courses, it was almost as being in the classroom together. It really requires a whole different way of setting the course up. We've also moved to virtual learning journeys more. So it is possible, and participants do like it. The other thing that we've noticed is that by putting it virtually, of course, we had the challenges of the different time zones, etc. But by putting it virtually, we've managed to actually increase our reach and impact to participants and countries that would never have been able to attend a course if we had just done them in Geneva and just. So, for example, for a course on ATT, we've had 23 additional countries attending the virtual session than we've ever had in that for that topic. So that's really something that we want to take on board and continue. So we're now rethinking also the whole portfolio. Which are the courses that we want to just deliver online going forward? Which are the courses that we will have in a hybrid mode and deliver both in virtual settings and also face-to-face? Because face-to-face has its value. We are also in International Geneva. There are many courses that take advantage of the fact that we're International Geneva, that we can access all the other organizations that are here and incorporate that into our courses. And then there are also certain topics or simulations that are better done face-to-face. So going forward, we'll definitely continue with this hybrid mode. But we always have, this is something that the private sector does quite well. You always have to think 2-3 steps ahead to make sure that you are relevant, that you bring value. And I think that going forward, we will see a quite big change also in the whole executive education and the modalities and how it will be delivered. I've been around 2009, 2010 already in the executive education business when the private sector was hit by a big economic crisis, if you remember. And there the executive education market collapsed extremely. And we had to, at that time, already rethink everything on how to do it differently. So all of these challenges bring also new opportunities. And I think I've managed to incorporate here now many of the learnings that I've had 2009, 2010 when the crisis hit. Because as you will see now as well, this pandemic is turning into an economic crisis, a social crisis, can become a security crisis. So this will all impact the executive education. Some organizations will no longer exist. Others will have to be able to adapt very quickly and being agile, adapt also with new technologies. And these are the ones that will actually survive and drive the market forward.
Yes, the coronavirus pandemic and its effects on society are just not short term, as some may have hoped. They're definitely going to continue on into the future. And the education sector, namely universities all around the world, are going to have to adapt. Many are also going virtual, and many will continue to offer virtual online classes as an option in the future. And as you correctly mentioned, this has a wider reach around the world for people in different countries or people from different socioeconomic strata. And we're facing a whole new industry potentially in the future with a lot more competition. So we'll stay tuned to see what happens there. But thank you so much for commenting on that. I also wanted to ask you about your work on women, peace, and security. I know you've been working a little bit with some of your colleagues on certain projects. Could you share with us a little bit about those specific projects and why you're passionate about WPS?
So thank you for this question. We've already raised it a bit in your event a few weeks ago. So I think that firstly, now more than ever, people recognize that gender equality is not just the right thing for women and girls, men and boys, but it is really an imperative. The challenges that we have to face need the talent and the creativity of a whole population and not just a segment of it. And as we have seen again with COVID-19, many risks to security in the 21st century are emerging from human security challenges like viruses, but are likely to be exacerbated by the climate changes. So we will not be able to address them only with a top-down hierarchical approach. We need to see the whole human and ecological ecosystem and reevaluate how we coexist within it. I think that's really one of the key messages that, it's not a top-down one solution approach, but really an ecosystem and a systemic approach. For that, it is really important to really understand all the different risks, which are complex, diverse, and multifaceted. A few examples of things that we have done is, for example, with our work with Dr. Catherine Turner of the Durham University and the Mediterranean Women Mediation work. We've been exploring different approaches to help us to recognize, value, and integrate the contributions that women make in all spaces, local, national, regional, and international, to be more inclusive of many actors and build connections between them. This is also something that we're doing, for example, with the Kofi Annan Foundation in Ghana for a group of women in peace operations, and we're doing that quite successfully. We've adapted our flagship program around inspiring women leadership to their specific needs. And as we want really to create impact, and we want not just to fish for people, but to teach them how to fish, we've also engaged in a whole train-the-trainer process that will go forward, so how they can also share that with the local community. And then we regularly have our inspirational women leadership courses here in Geneva, who are again bringing together all the key stakeholders that are here and active in peace and security, which is really every time a huge success. And we also see that certain countries actually are ready now to invest in such programs for women. For example, the UK has done this recently for over 50 women to prepare them to take higher position in the UN system. So it's really something that we see is happening and on the priority agenda of many different countries. Policy side, we've also recently launched a series of major policy briefs to explore inclusion further. From the role of empowerment and our mindsets to applying gender lens. We've also found that our approach to leadership actually informs our thinking also in the gender space, moving away from very masculine leader identities towards seeing leadership as a process that happens between people and at all levels. So rather than just measuring the perceived competencies of individuals, we need to recognize that culture and leadership culture in particular is shifting from hierarchical to a more interdependent. And that's when we can measure success by looking at the outcomes rather than over focusing on individual competencies. And we've seen that actually all the challenges that we currently face, there's not just one person who can solve it or just with the competencies. It's really bringing different things together, different points of views and different approaches also to looking at these challenges. So in this very polarized world, what we found is that this polarity thinking is a valuable tool in leadership, because not everything is just a problem that you need to solve that has one solution. We more and more have polarities, dichotomies that we have to leverage. So it's not an either or, it's in both and. So for example, to make it a bit more concrete, it's not just about state security, but it's state security and human security. It's both. And how do you leverage both? And I think that this is something that is really important, not just in the gender, but in general for addressing the challenges that we currently face. We also believe that, also as was highlighted in your recent event, there's still a lot to be done across all pillars to address the gendered nature of security, and in particular the participation of women. Meaningful participation is key, and we must strive to ensure that the women peace security agenda is about making women count and not simply counting women. So bringing the right women at the table. And I think that this is where we also put a lot of the focus on how to prepare these women to be really powerful listen to partners in the process.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. Christina was referring to an event that we had a couple of weeks ago at the Marshall Center on the Women, Peace and Security, Resolution 1325, 20 years since. Where are we and where do we go from here? You can see some more details about that on our social media pages. What I really particularly liked about your comments, both at that conference and today, is when you mentioned the ecosystems approach to security. I think that's absolutely vital in the way forward and how we're going to progress with security policy in all sectors of society. And that's really partially what inspired this podcast series also, is this ecosystems approach and how we can engage in conversations with different sectors and industries to reach a more kind of wholesome perspective that doesn't kind of miss out on what a hierarchical perspective would miss out on, for example. But being in the security sector, women in the security sector, do you find that it's particularly challenging and that equality is a little bit tougher to reach in the security sector than others? Or what would be your perspective on that?
I think that it's getting it right is quite challenging in all the different sectors. But I think that particularly in the peace and security area, it is maybe more difficult than in others. And this has been highlighted, for example, again through the COVID situation. Whilst the media and research has reported that female-led countries are handling the pandemic better than male-led countries, women and girls are still largely marginalized by COVID-19, from the care burden through to domestic violence, access to digital assets and skills, as well as diversion of funds from essential health services, including those that meet women's sexual and reproductive rights and needs. And we've also heard firsthand from peace builders in the field, how the closure of schools under the COVID-19 measures had further limited their capacity to engage in paid work and indeed voluntary work, which is so often where the peace work really happens. Therefore, moving forward, addressing the gendered implication of COVID-19 for all genders will be of utmost importance for the security sector. However, many good practices also exist. The OSCE, for example, is an example of an organization that has taken very specific measures to support staff during COVID-19. However, again, underrepresentation of women in decision-making positions is still a challenge, particularly in the field of arms control, cyber, and military security. In our own cyber challenge, which competition event that we have every year, we see that there are many more mixed teams that succeed. We've had more and more also women-only teams. They haven't been the finalists yet, but they have progressed extremely well. And so once again, with these mixed teams who are regularly winning or in second position, you actually see the value add to actually have all the different genders represented.
Great, thank you. We're certainly making progress, and we should keep at it because it will definitely help in all matters. It can only help, to engage the 50% of the world population that we're not currently engaging to its maximum potential. So in the security sector, lately we're looking a lot at great power competition. We're looking a lot at transatlantic security and at the threat of disinformation campaigns, which is in a way maybe the primary theme of a lot of these video podcasts. And I'd like to have a different perspective on these questions. And coming from Switzerland, a very neutral country, would you say that categorizing the relationship between the United States, Russia, and China as great power competition is the right term to use for what we're seeing today?
What we see is a resurgence in great power competition in the form of increased tensions within the UN and affiliated institutions. For example, the veto of US and China on UN Secretary General Global Ceasefire Proposal, or the US withdrawal from the WHO due to accusations of being too soft with China. A term also often used in this context is more strategic competition, especially when it comes between the US and China. In terms of the relationship between the US and Russia, what we've seen is after the Cold War, the US developed close partnerships with European countries, building the NATO alliance, isolating Russia. And although Russia still possesses a sphere of influence over post-Soviet countries and Central Asia, the real power player in Asia is China. And this has shifted the attention of the US from Russia to China, effectively reducing the competition between Russia and the US. And what we are also noticing at the GCSP as an impartial organization is that there is a positive development in that both China and the US are more willing to engage with us to promote soft power.
Yes, it's definitely unique to the modern day and not exactly similar to how it was in the past. But there certainly are, as you said, rising competition between the powers, and that leads to rising uncertainty and rising instability. What about in terms of the transatlantic relationship? That's also experiencing quite a few tensions these days. What do you see between the EU and the US in the next decade in the realm of trade, security, foreign policy? Are we witnessing what some have been calling a transatlantic rift? Or do you expect to see a bit more solidarity?
The relationship between the EU and the US has always been complicated. After all, it's an unconventional pairing between one of the most powerful countries and a EU that represents at time the view of 27 member states. Under the current US administration, there is clearly a rift between the US and Europe. Increased trade tensions, security tensions, for example, Trump's disregard for NATO and US bases relocation out of Germany, but also in foreign policy, especially when it comes to Iran. Europeans have set up a barter system with Iran to circumvent US sanctions. On the future of the transatlantic relationships, I think that a decade is a long time. It represents the term of two presidents and the start of a third one. However, what we can say at this stage is that the future of the US-EU relationship will be heavily influenced by who is winning the elections in November. So we will have to see the outcome of those elections to make a more detailed analysis of where the EU-US relationship is going. If Trump remains president, the rift will likely widen. The main worries are around the US disengaging from NATO or placing conditions on Article 5, trade tariffs, and a growing US international isolationism, with the consequent risk that China and Russia will fill the void. If Biden wins the election, we shall see a narrowing on the rift. it is highly likely that the EU-US relationship will improve in some areas and become more normalized. For example, there would be an increased cooperation with the EU on climate change and multilateralism. But transatlantic tensions would probably remain on defense, trade, Iran, and China. They will probably just be managed differently. We also think that a good relationship between the US and the EU would strengthen both sides of the Atlantic, as both sides, the EU and the US, are competing with Russia and China. Yet, because of what happened during the last 4 years, the Europeans have realized that they can no longer blindly rely on the US and that they must become more independent. This could also be seen in technological developments where the Europeans are trying to find their own way between the US and China.
Well, great. That was a terrific summary of EU-US relations. I tend to agree with what you said, and this relationship is vital to strengthen in the future. They both founded the liberal international order on a set of values that they still share, and the challenge is probably to turn those shared values into shared interests and shared perceptions and shared threat perceptions. More specifically, which will be a bit of a challenge since they're different and they have different needs, and we must also remember the domestic needs of each of the areas, which are now facing their own challenges. So while the election certainly will matter, I think there's also some deeper structural issues at play that will continue to pose a challenge for the relationship. But what about the threat of disinformation campaigns? That has also created some rifts within societies inside the EU and inside the United States. This is kind of a hybrid tactic of some of the more malign actors that want to use divide and conquer strategies to weaken the transatlantic relationship. So what are the dangers of these campaigns, and what can the West do to increase its defense against powers and actors that seek to divide public opinion?
For both the EU and the US, the disinformation campaigns waged by Russia, but more importantly China, has been a wake-up call, especially for the EU. China has, for instance, openly criticized the way democratic countries handle the crisis, for example, France, and instead promoted its own model. So the reactions to the situation have been increased suspicion against China. And as a result, the UK, for example, has completely reversed its policies on 5G by doing a 180 turn on its position on Huawei, which will no longer be considered for equipping that country. The danger of disinformation is that it breaks the social contract between citizen and government in democracies. And when citizens lose trust in our institutions, the core of democratic governments is affected. And this is a very serious issue.
Absolutely. Education is key, and multiple sources, fact checking, engaging with social media companies to make sure that we're responsible and not spreading false information is going to be a very, very difficult challenge in the next decade, but very vital. So, Christina, as I expected, this was a very insightful conversation. I want to thank you again for taking the time to join us today. So thank you very much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in to Security in the 21st Century. Stay tuned for the next episode.